Hi, everybody. I'm Ali Pakras, and I'm hosting today's Jewish Art Salon meeting. Yona, I think, will be here towards the end. So the Jewish Art Salon is a global group of artists and scholars. We're based in NYC and have organized over 30 exhibitions in the US, Israel, and Amsterdam. We provide important programs and resources and develop lasting partnerships with the international art community and the general public. Today's talk is going to be by Ezra and Amy, and this session is co-sponsored by Jada Art. Yonatas, I think Yonatas is here. Great.
I'm here, Ali. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Excellent. So good to be here. Thank you so much for introducing me. I'll just say a few words if you don't mind. Yona asked me to kind of like bring up what's coming up with Jada.
Great.
All right, so first of all, I'm going to share here on the chat session whatever I say right now so that everybody can always see it later. So here you go. Jada is a meta-modern grassroots art organization. And basically what we do is we get together across the disciplines all over the world for art shows, art fairs, artist in residence programs, and we partner with the Jewish Art Salon every now and then. Last year we had our biggest partnership with the Jewish Art Salon during Miami Art Basel Week. And what you see here on the chat is Jada will be hosting a art fair and artist residence program in Paris on October 19th until the 30th. Everybody from the Jewish Art Salon will receive a discount to be part of it. You guys are our, let's say, the people we want to be there with us. We are being mindful of everything that's happening with COVID-19. Paris is a place where society has already been opened and the numbers are not going up. There are issues also with the traveling of Americans to Paris and all that. So we have plans A, B, C, and D. So approach us and we'll talk more about that. But most importantly, even if you don't want to go anywhere, even if you just want to stay in New York, in New Jersey, in California, anywhere you are, submit an entry for the Jada Art Journal. We will have an art journal that will be published by Jada Miami Art Fair, which takes place during Miami Art Basel in December. And whoever submits an entry will be invited to be a speaker or an exhibitor at the art fair. So please pay attention to that. You have all the links here on the chat. If you have any questions, just approach me via Facebook, via email, anytime, okay?
Thanks, Yonatas.
Thank you.
So just gonna repeat a little bit what I said earlier because we have some people who just joined. If we can all make sure that we're muted so that there's no background noise. And then if you have any questions, obviously we're gonna have questions after each speaker and then at the end. Please use the raise hand function, which I believe you click on participants and you should see a button to raise your hand. And then when we facilitate questions, I'll call on people in the order of the hands raised. So we're gonna go ahead and get started. Let me find the bios. And then Amy, are you here?
Yes.
Great. Let me pull up your bio. Amy Rubin is a Jewish artist who has lived in rural Nova Scotia, Canada for the past 10 years. Her work is often installation-based and explores themes of lineage, personal narrative, and identity. She primarily works as a textile artist, bringing traditional needlework into a contemporary context. So Amy, take it away.
Okay. I was expecting Ezra to go first, but here we go. Let me get my share screen. Okay, can everyone see that all right? Okay, so I thought what I would do is do a little bit of an overview of the work that I've done in the past, and give a bit of context to my current projects. And although Ezra and I are presenting separately, it's kind of a joint effort. I met them a few months ago, I guess, and was initially introduced to their work just by finding them. I think they'll talk a little bit more about how we met, perhaps, but I think that our work is different in the approaches that we take, but kind of leads to similar places. So I'm very excited to co-present with Ezra, and thank you so much to Jewish Art Salon and to Jada for sponsoring this. So I'm starting off with some of my older work, because what's always been important to me is to find ways to tell people's stories. And I've been interested in a long time about how to learn about a person through art without just necessarily doing a portrait that you hang on the wall or a sculpture. And so this is one of my first shows that I had, and it was actually about a fictional character that I created, and I made an installation creating his living space. And so it was kind of a combination of assemblage and collecting things, but there's also photography and drawing and some mixed media sculpture. So what was interesting was that I wanted people to be able to feel like they could interact with the space. And initially there were concerns of, oh my gosh, well, what if people take something or break something? And it ended up being a very different experience where people were really very cautious, and sort of the double layer of you're not supposed to touch something that's in an art gallery, and also that it was someone's intimate environment, and the feeling of going through their drawers. For a lot of people, that they expressed, they were like, wow, that was really hard for me to feel like I had permission to be so intimately in someone's life. So this is an example. This particular person, the way they kept track of memory, it wasn't through photographs, but they kept scents that reminded them of certain people or places or times. And here's an image of their workspace and someone who's interacting with the dresser. And then this is some work that I did a little bit later. And the main theme of this show was about how people emotionally process. And for me, at that point in my life, and you know, starting when I was about 11 or 12, it was through journaling. And as I got older, first of all, the journals kind of accumulated, so it was a lot of schlepping them around. And as I met other people, I noticed that some people emotionally processed while they were doing something else. And so I thought about times when I'd be working through something, putting it in my journal, whereas another friend might, you know, end up with, you know, 25 cans of chutney. And it seems like, wow, that's such a more useful way to have some time to sit with emotions. And I also wondered about in various times in history, various times in people's lives, if that's the time that we get alone, is time when we're working on something else. So some of the pieces, this is one where sometimes I was taking lines from my journals and then putting them in a craft context. So this was made out of those little loopy things that you put it around nails and you knit. I don't know if anyone did those when they were younger. And then I also took my journals and turned them into craft pieces. So this is cut up journals made into a latch hook. After that, I started dabbling a little bit in more traditional portraiture, specifically with pictures from my family. So this first picture here on the left of the screen, that would be my grandfather and my dad in the 40s in Montreal. And so I made it kind of like a little book, a little like those old, before we had phones, where we'd keep our photographs all together. But then I did also bring in some text and some things that weren't specifically about the person who the portrait was of. So this one is based on a photograph of my dad, but the story is something made up. But I was looking for little fragments of stories that I thought might resonate with people as kind of a shared human experience. And then this was another installation, and it was based on the life of my biological grandmother. I'm adopted, and I found my biological grandmother when I was about 25. And so I had a good number of years where I was able to have a relationship with her. My biological mother had already passed away. And so we had a lot of conversations. She had a very interesting life, more than I can really go into in this presentation. But basically, she was born in Lithuania and was there during World War II. And actually her farm, right on the property, there were train tracks and trains during World War II that were going to concentration camps went through her property multiple times a day. And they lived in a displacement camp for a while. And so when they moved to Canada, and when my biological mother had me, the biological father was Jewish, who didn't know that I was born, but she felt very strongly she wanted me to be in a Jewish home. So that's how I came to be in a Jewish family. So my biological grandmother did a lot of cut embroidery, and she did it when she first moved to Canada. She said, I don't speak any English, so this is what I did. And I wanted to take that, but take it into a bit more of a contemporary context. So each of the little pieces that I had set up in the bedroom either were a quote that she had told me, something that came up in conversation, or something that kind of sat with me that I was kind of wrestling with or sitting with over time. So I did images of my biological mother, and I wanted them to be a little bit ghostly, a little bit, with not all the details there. And I have these objects that were given and that I don't have a whole lot of context for. And so I think that sometimes happens when someone passes away, is to just sort of end up with this sort of random collection of things. And so they found their way into the pieces as well. So cut embroidery is very fun, very time consuming, very terrifying the first time you do it, because I didn't understand why it wasn't going to fall apart. You put all these hours into stitching, but somehow it just doesn't. So it feels kind of magical to me. So some other examples. And so these were placed on kind of like a night table, dresser. And then on the bed, I had what I call the insomnia quilt, which was sort of the main piece that I worked on, because my grandmother told me that she would often be up at night before her and I connected. And my biological mother had passed away when she was about 33. And so had her other child in the displacement camp. So she would kind of lie awake at night and just be holding all this missing, all this trauma, all these questions. And so I kind of wanted to do something that reflected this middle of the night weightiness of the thoughts, but have it a bit subtle. So I made sure that the words were there, but not right in your face, right? You had to kind of go close and see what was there. And so now, this is some of the current work that I'm doing. So this first project, I'm really excited. I'm working with a close friend of mine, a collaborator who is a poet and a writer, Sadika Demeyer. And so Sadika is from a background that's mixed religion, Muslim and Christian. And her and I both, over the years, have kind of, I think it's more active than strayed from our religion, but been kind of actively pushed our religions away and then kind of found our way back. And so we're doing a stitched conversation back and forth where we ask each other a question and then we stitch the answer and then stitch another question. So this is one where we're not quite sure yet about how it'll ultimately be presented. It's kind of got all sorts of performance art and installation possibilities. So her question to me had been, what's your earliest religious memory? And my answer was, age 6, if I don't say the Shema every night, I will wake up blind. And then I asked her a question. She had said something about having a stirring of contradictions. So I asked her what contradicts in her. So what we're also going to do along with this conversation is we're going to have extra pieces that kind of allow things to go a little bit deeper. So I'm assuming that probably Sadika and certainly some viewers may not know what the Shema is. And so I felt like I wanted to add some extra pieces to kind of explain what it is and also my relationship to it. And so I'm showing you this piece, which to me sums up a lot of how I feel about Judaism, which is that when I was growing up in it, I come from a family of atheists. We were living in Waterloo, Ontario, which didn't have a huge Jewish population, but I was going to Hebrew school 3 times a week, hating it, feeling like I did not fit in there. Our family didn't really fit in there. My father was often in conflict with the rabbi. And so, but there was this beauty to it also. Like there was this beauty to the objects. I loved Hebrew script and felt very kind of drawn to it. And I chose this because I think it's really, really beautiful. And it's also the story of the binding of Isaac, which I can remember in Hebrew school just being like, how is this okay? How is it okay to be willing to kill your own child because God told you to? And I don't feel like I was at the right place where the people who were teaching me were really able to help me unpack that. And then, I'd go home and to an atheist family, we're just like, well, I don't know, that doesn't make sense to us either. So it didn't feel like there was anything there that I could really plug into, except for the beauty of the song, the script, and the objects, which really stayed with me. So it's not quite finished. So everything I'm showing you now is a work in progress. So what I have here that's gonna have a pomegranate like I showed in the sketch is these 2 sides for the Shema, and partly the way that I left, but then also the way I came back. And the more that I started learning about Judaism once I got older and was researching on my own terms, the more I understood how much it could encompass and how much room there was within it and how many different sub-streams there were. And it's taken me a while because at first what felt like I was aligned, where I was aligned spiritually, was often very contemporary, and they had done away with a lot of the traditional melodies and the traditional objects, which was such a part of what drew me and kept me interested. So it's taken some time to find ways to keep that very ancient tradition, but also be in line with who I am and what I feel both spiritually and philosophically. And as more time goes on, the more I see that it really is out there, but it was hard to find it for me. So this is part of Sadika's answer. So about what contradicts for her: claiming my belonging and sense of faith with wanting to convey that I have a free mind. And then she had the question of who told you that you would go blind? And the answer is that nobody did, but I guess there was that feeling. I do remember being told that if I dropped the Torah, I would have to fast for 40 years. And so I think there was just this weighty sort of fear that something really bad could happen if I wasn't religiously observant in a specific way. And then it just, as a 6-year-old, that's how it manifested. Okay, now the other 2 projects that I have in their infancy have to do more with geography. So I live in Nova Scotia, so that's that little red part of Canada down there. So I'm in a town called Bear River. So Halifax is the big city, and it's about 300,000 or 400,000 people. And the next big city would be Montreal, which is about like 13 hours away from where we are. So it's pretty small where I live. The actual village I live in is about 1,000 people. So certainly to be Jewish in this context, if a minyan's important to you, if a synagogue's important to you, it's kind of impossible to find it and practice in that way here. And yet I knew I wasn't the only Jewish person, and there are a around. And so I became really fascinated by this. So my initial idea was that in Nova Scotia, the traditional kind of artistic expression is rug hooking. And so before COVID hit, I had this idea that I would take Jewish themes and attend, there's all sorts of rug hooking circles here, and to kind of show up and, you know, be hooking a rug with a Jewish theme and meeting people and chatting with people and seeing, can these worlds kind of come together? And so of course now that plan has shifted a little bit. So I'm working more independently. So my first plan that got really, really strongly implanted in my mind was to do kind of a floral rug hooking, which is very common here, but then very subtly in the background have the words, "Am I a bad Jew for doing this?" So I've got my, I'm all excited. I've done my, this is the cranking motion of getting the wool done. So I've got my colors, and I'm going to start rug hooking soon. So the image that I'm using is actually a mandrake, because I was doing some work with the story of the tribe of Rubin and Rubin, who would bring mandrakes, and who was kind of put on the outside of things. So kind of playing with that. I also have been really interested in finding all these marginalia in some of the older Jewish works. So these are all just little seeds of ideas, because they come from actual you know, hybrid creatures or different animals that are found in old Jewish works. And you know, it felt a bit sometimes when I'm here that I am kind of a combination of all these different things. And not quite entirely fitting in anywhere, but you know, working to be okay with that. And then, as I said, I knew I wasn't the only one, and I wanted to kind of expand this outward. And there are Jewish people who, you know, have lived elsewhere and come here, sometimes intentionally to get away from the Jewish community, sometimes just by life circumstances. And there are also a few very surprising historically significant Jewish communities within Nova Scotia. So Yarmouth is one of those towns on the map of Nova Scotia. It's kind of at the very far reaches of Nova Scotia, and they had for a while a really thriving Jewish community of about 50 families. They had a synagogue, and eventually, you know, it petered out a little bit. And so this is actually part of the Torah Ark, and one of the windows from it, once the synagogue was kind of taken apart, some of it has ended up in a museum, but this is actually in a woman's little kind of cabin who was one of the families, and everything was being taken away. And so she has this just in her home, just part of the synagogue. And it's a community that is so loving and tight-knit and really beautiful. And actually that has a very, the other community within Yarmouth that's kind of not just, you know, kind of British, Scottish descent settlers with, you know, maybe like a small indigenous population as well, is there's quite a sizable Lebanese community in Yarmouth, and the Lebanese and the Jewish community really have so much in common and are really quite close and have quite a unique relationship that I'm just beginning to learn about. So for the last little bit, what I've been doing is I've been interviewing people, and I'm hoping to create a collection of work based on the interviews that I conduct. And so I thought I would just quickly go through. I work a lot with text, as you can see. So I just have a few little sentences that have sat with me since starting the interviews that I thought I would just kind of quietly show to you. So. Okay, so I will end it there and turn it over to questions or Ezra, and I'll stop sharing my screen.
So we can do a few questions now, and then of course at the end we'll have a much longer time for questions at the end. But if you, we could probably do 2 or 3 questions right now. So if you can raise your hand via the raise your hand function, and I can call on you. Yonatas?
Oh, thank you. Amy, first of all, your art is phenomenal. It takes us to places and times that are so intimate. So thank you so much for what you do. My question is, your use of lexicon. I haven't seen other languages there besides Hebrew and English, if I'm not wrong. Do you also make use of Yiddish? Do you also deconstruct, let's say, language to offer different perspectives as well? It's just a question about your overall practice.
Yeah, thank you. That's a great question. And it really makes me think, because Yiddish is, you know, my dad's parents and certainly his grandparents, that's all they spoke. So we've gotten little fragments, but I guess for me, the actual sort of sitting down and learning a language was definitely, that was through Hebrew. And that's, so that is a big part of it for me. I did actually use Lithuanian in the quilt that I made, but I don't speak it. So it was more sort of an attempt to embody, you know, sort of assuming that that's what language my grandmother was thinking in. And so for me, the 2 languages I speak really are English and French, and Hebrew is, you know, I can recite it. I can, you know, I know a few little words. But that makes me kind of feel like, oh yeah, there's Yiddish. That's a whole other thing.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, thank you for that.
Of course, thank you.
All right, Deborah?
Hi. Can you hear me?
Yeah, hi.
Okay, hi. So I'm curious about what attracts you to material, to traditionally female medium rug work and embroidery, and how does that resonate to you rather than using calligraphy and ink? What is it? How is it central to you? And it's interesting that you also choose to that you have a very deep connection to Judaism. Yet I know that there's a struggle inside there as well. So I'm just curious to hear you comment about that.
Yeah, well, what great questions. So I transitioned into using textiles actually when my son was a toddler, because I was really looking for ways that I could still do my work that wasn't dangerous to him, and that also if I needed to be interrupted very suddenly, the work wouldn't get ruined, and that I could just kind of pick it up again. So it became this really portable way for me to still be doing my work. And I loved it. I'm a really tactile person, and I just love the feeling of it. And I also am a person who, I've never been a person who liked using a desk. You know, in high school, I just kind of sat on my bed, and you know, I like to be sitting somewhere just kind of cozy and nest-like, and doing work in that way. And so the part of it's just, yeah, the thought of, you know, sometimes I think about, you know, I have done watercolors and different things, but the thought of, you know, getting it all set up on a table and sitting in a chair in that way is just not appealing to me in terms of how I want to spend my time. And I am really interested in home and just kind of coziness and what feels comfortable, and when, you know, we've let our guard completely down and are just, you know, in our element. So that's definitely part of it as well. And then in terms of my connection to Judaism, that, yeah, like it was sort of such a surprise to me moving through life, because kind of from my 20s and early 30s, I was sort of open to anything except that. And you know, I remember once being invited to a spiritual ceremony in a different tradition, and kind of like getting this sense of, so this is how they do it. I was like, okay, well, if there's a they, then that means I'm thinking of a we. And I guess what I mean is Judaism. And I was a little bit horrified, I think, but then feeling like, well, I mean, it's part of me. These are the songs that give me chills. This is what kind of brings tears to my eyes. And then as I started, again, it was parenting, because living where I live, if my son's going to know anything, I'm the one who has to teach him, because he won't get exposed anywhere else. So I started doing research and finding all these little bits of like, oh my gosh, like this is so amazing. And all the things that to me had been deal breakers, I realized were not, that was just one way of interpreting things. And so I felt like a whole other world opened up that I wasn't expecting.
Great. Fred, and then Richard and Anne, I'll lower your hands, but then we'll come back for more questions for Amy after Ezra's presentation.
Amy, first, sorry. This is my first time that I've been to one of the salons online, and I'm glad I finally got to it. And it's a very nice day. I should be outside, but this is better. So, Amy, just a comment and then a question. Instead of you feeling shocked when you got this epiphany, think about maybe in awe or startled, or something that maybe has a more positive connotation, because I'm a great believer in beshert. You know what that is?
No.
So beshert is a Yiddish or Hebrew word that means it was meant to be. So it's the antithesis of coincidence. And
right.
I suspect that during your life, you are going to be blessed with beshert moments more than once. It happens to me every time I go, oh my God. Literally, oh my God. So just maybe something to okay, can you go back to the craft there where you were talking about doing a bad thing, or maybe I did a bad thing?
Oh, am I a bad Jew for doing this? That one?
Are you a bad Jew for doing this?
Yeah. Is that the one you mean?
Yes.
The rug hooking plan? Let's see. Let's see here. Here, this one? My very sketchy sketch. Yeah.
Okay. So why would you ask that question of yourself?
Yeah. I think partly is because growing up, we grew up in sort of a mid-sized town where, you know, if you wanted to participate in the Jewish community, I think this is pretty common. There was kind of like one synagogue, and it was conservative, but kind of bordering on Orthodox. And so there were many people who, you know, that's the practice that they had, and so it really worked well for them. And then there were other people who felt more like, well, I want to go be part of the community, and this is the only game in town. And so I think it's kind of a feeling that I've had. I used to jokingly say, like, oh yeah, you know, like, I'm Jewish, but we're the bad Jews, because we weren't kind of doing what everyone else was doing. So, and I've heard people ask that, like, it feels like it's a question that I've heard Jewish people ask, you know, about lots of different things, you know, and partly even with this, you know, it's part of the practice is me coming to terms with, you know, kind of being where I am, and, you know, can I be accepted here for who I am, and can I accept being here when it's you know, fantastic in so many ways, but also kind of like a strange sort of fit. And, you know, in my mind, I guess, even though I don't feel, it's tongue-in-cheek, and I don't feel like a bad person, but I certainly don't picture like going to a rug hooking circle in the Maritimes as like a kind of Jewish activity, but I felt like I could make it that for myself. And you know, even just sitting, and, you know, like the background's going to be linen, and the rug cooking is going to be wool, and it's not going to be worn, but, you know, there's all these little questions that I'm still learning, and that I feel so lucky to be Jewish, and very, very devoted to it, and very in love with it in a lot of ways. But I also kind of know that I need to be mindful of, because it's new to me in a lot of ways, I certainly don't want to be disrespecting a tradition, and I do kind of feel at risk of maybe they're stumbling into something that I'm not educated in, even though I went to Hebrew school for a really, really long time. And then also sometimes there are things that I do really disagree with, and I do want to push against in a very conscientious way, and that some people, you know, might disagree with. And so yeah, I guess that's where it comes from.
Well, I don't know why this is turning, why I'm doing this in a sermon, but something, the way you were, your conversion or whatever is, it's really touched my heart, and I want to try and relieve some of the anxiety that I sense about, oh, I have to, I don't want to be a bad Jew for doing this. So personally, my personal belief is the main difference between Judaism and most other religions is other religions say, work on the principle, to me, of fear, going to hell, that if you don't do something, you're going to hell. But in Judaism, the motto, the obligation is to do what you think is the right thing to do. Now, what's the right thing to do? My goodness, that depends on so many things. But the right thing, the right, is between you and God. Mm-hmm. It's okay with him, her, it. It's okay.
Right.
And on that note, I'm so sorry. We need to move on to Ezra. But again, there'll be plenty of time for questions and discussion after Ezra's presentation. All right. Ezra. Okay, Ezra. Do you, let's see. Do you want me to share your presentation?
No, I think I should be able to do it.
Okay. And then let me pull up your, sorry, I have a lot of tabs open.
Okay.
Okay, Ezra Rose is an illustrator, zinester, and mixed multimedia creator living on a small farm in Western Massachusetts with queer chosen family. Their art explores monsters, magic, queer trans identity, and Jewish culture, celebrating the marginal and connecting to the symbols and stories of both past and present. Ezra's work has appeared in tabletop games, comics, anthologies, and other small indie press. Their website is www.ezra/rose.com. Ezra, take it away.
All right, I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen. Yes, share. Okay. So I'll talk a little bit about how Amy and I met in a minute and how we got connected, but I only started making Jewish work, specifically Jewish work, I would say, in 2017. So it's kind of relatively recent for me, but it's been a huge turning point in what I'm interested in making and how I relate to my own work and how I relate to kind of my artistic community. The work started to take a more Jewish turn around the time that I was getting really, really involved in the study of Jewish mysticism and magic and myth, which is, I'll talk a lot more about that later. So this is one of my earliest pieces from that period. It's a pen and ink piece that I did as sort of a study for a zine that I was working on at the time, which I'll show you in a minute. So this is an angel as described by Ezekiel. This is one of the Chayot HaKodesh, which are kind of like the big, scary angels that kind of hover around the chariot. And for me, Jewish angels, as opposed to, I would say, Hallmark angels, are something really terrifying, and also something that I feel connected to through this lens of trauma and kind of transition. I feel like angels show up in the text at traumatic transitional points in people's lives, and they kind of help move you through that in an intense way. So that's where my kind of vision of angels come from. And the angels I was working on were connected to this zine that I was doing. So that's a small self-published book. I was creating a zine based on an English translation of a chapter from early Jewish mysticism. So you know, there's not a good date on it, but it's the early kind of chariot mysticism about, you know, rabbis and other, you know, holy men who would, depending on how you look at it, ascend or descend to the holy chariot. So this one is about specifically the dangers of listening to angels singing around the holy chariot. And it's a really intense, gory text, very old. I was kind of shocked at how gross it was, and I was really excited by it. So I took the text and I did illustrations that were pretty much directly kind of representing what would happen, but in a very iconic way. I was looking at old Ashkenazi carved gravestones for image borders. So this is the first page of that. And I debuted that at the Massachusetts Independent Comics Expo, and the response that people had to that really pushed me in a stronger kind of like investigating Jewish culture direction. In 2017, I did with my partner Jay Barnes a story for a comics anthology called Heartwood. It was the first all non-binary comics anthology, all non-binary artists and creators. And the pitch for the anthology, you had to create a story about a non-binary character who enters the woods somewhere and has a transformative experience and comes out changed. So I wrote a story about a person who has in their childhood fled their Jewish community into the woods around Sukkot and ends up staying with a group of Jewish fairies in a sukkah in the woods and has this kind of transformative experience, and then comes back 40 years later as an adult sort of to see if the fairies are still there. So it's called Shuva, or Return. And I also did some character designs. So on the left-hand side of the screen is my original character designs. And then on the right-hand side of the screen is my partner's amazing artwork for the final story. So I started getting connected to tabletop role-playing games through a game that I played years ago called Dream Askew, which was written by Avery Alder. And it's a game about a group, like a small community of queer post-apocalyptic survivors trying to build a home after, outside of societal collapse. And I was a fan of that game, and I played it in like 2016, 2017. And then in 2018, I kind of, I feel like this was Bashert. I was contacted by Avery to illustrate the official release of the game, just totally out of the blue almost. And it was being paired, Dream Askew was being paired with a game by Benjamin Rosenbaum called Dream Apart, which took place in the 19th century in a shtetl. And that game is about a group, a small Jewish community experiencing outsidership in their, kind of small removed context. And it has kind of elements of fabulism, kind of magical realism. So I illustrated those games. And Amy went to a workshop, because Avery is Canadian, Avery Alder. Amy went to a workshop to play these games and saw my art and wrote me an email, and we got connected that way. And we just really incredibly hit it off, and have been super connected for the past couple months. Let's see. So in 2019, I was feeling a lot of a lot of anger and a lot of kind of intense emotion about kind of global rise of fascism, but particularly in the United States. And I made this piece as a response to that, and as kind of a pushing forward of specifically Jewish anti-fascist resistance to what's going on in the world right now. So this takes a Yiddish protest song from the 40s, We Will Outlive Them, which has its own kind of like, apocryphal story that goes with it. But it pairs it with the image of two creatures from Jewish mysticism, the Leviathan, which is the giant sea monster, and the Ziz, which is the giant bird, both of them just kind of like shredding the Nazi flag. And I am really interested in the ways that old parts of Jewish history and kind of pieces of mysticism can be repurposed in a modern context, because these are creatures that inspire awe, but I also like personally see them as kind of guardians. And this had a pretty big response from some Jewish organizations and public figures on social media. And it's something that I see pop up in other places, like people have shared it. It seems like it has really resonated with people, which is really exciting to me because I had never really had that response to my work before. I've done a little bit of kind of graphic design. I work in all kinds of media. The thing on the left is a t-shirt design that I made just for myself. It's a joke on Jewish demons, Shadim, and it utilizes the kind of devil horns rock symbol with the priestly blessing. And I really just made that for me, but other people were kind of interested in it. And then on the right is a logo for a queer, anti-fascist, vegan, Yiddish, pay what you want cafe in Glasgow, which is an incredible thing that needs to exist in the world. So they contacted me to do their logo, and I had fun kind of working with this old Yiddish concept of the golden peacock, but making it pink with violets to kind of represent queer culture, and the crown is a shin. I also sculpt sometimes. I've been making these little tiny golem figurines. These are actually polymer clay mixed with wood ash and textured to sort of replicate stone. And the idea behind these is that they are kind of a little personal protector figure. They hold a little scroll that you can write whatever you want on. And I made them in conjunction with a zine that talks about kind of the history of the golem as a Jewish figure, its identity as a protector. And I've also made jewelry of the little golem faces. I feel really connected to creatures and concepts in Judaism more than I do to Jewish human characters. So that that's been a way for me to kind of explore Jewish identity in that way. This is a piece that I made right at the beginning of the pandemic when I was thinking a lot about Jewish ethics and how they kind of guide us. And it's a ritual hand washing cup with the Musar trait of achrayut, like responsibility, like care for others. How Jews have been, you know, taking this very seriously for millennia at this point, and how I felt comforted by the fact that, you know, I was seeing in a lot of my personal Jewish community a really strong response to the pandemic, and, you know, taking care of ourselves and taking care of each other, and how that's rooted in so much of our traditional culture. Another part of my practice that kind of blends art and magic a little bit is that I make sigils. So these are statements of intent. Someone gives me a statement of intent, usually a short present tense affirmative phrase, and I go through a process where I create an image based on this. So it distills the essence of the text. So this is 30 sigils that I made in the past month, I want to say, because generally when I do this, I do it for donations to organizations that are important to me. So these were all created for donations in response to the Black Lives Matter uprisings. So they were for the Minnesota Freedom Fund, the Atlanta Solidarity Fund, Black Visions Collective, Reclaim the Block, and then some things that are just important to me as a small farmer and a queer and trans person. The Okra Project is an amazing organization. Soul Fire Farm is a Black and Indigenous and people of color farm in New York. And then I'm also a banjo player, so the Black Banjo Reclamation Project. So I had folks donate to all of these organizations in return for me making these sigils, and it raised over $1,000, which I was shocked by, but it was really exciting. And then this is a little bit about the history of sigils. People think of them as a very modern kind of esoteric practice that has its roots in, you know, Western esotericism, but that all really has its roots in Jewish magic, and specifically kind of like the Christian and then Western occultist appropriation of Jewish magic, starting in the Middle Ages and you know, descending through the years to today. And this is kind of a special interest of mine, so I do a lot of study around it. So this is an example of one of my sigils with an original Jewish magic circle from a text that's in the British Library collection, and then some sigils from the Lesser Key of Solomon, which is a Christian document based loosely on Jewish mysticism, and then Austin Osman Spare's chaos magic sigils from the 20th century, which is what most people mean when they say they're doing sigil magic today, is that kind of, I take a statement and I take the letters and I make it into something. So I kind of consider the work I do to be a little bit reappropriating. So this is a piece that I started in response to a show that I went to last fall. Leonard Baskin is one of my favorite artists, a huge inspiration on me. And I went to a gallery retrospective of his where I got to see a lot of his work in person, and also hear a talk by his son. And this piece is a little bit of a response to the difference between how I see the bodies in his work and the way that he saw them, I think. So I look at these sort of bird people with large bodies as kind of like beautiful and imposing, and I connect them to Shadim, again, Jewish demons, which to me have a really strong kind of queer connection, where angels for me are around like trauma and transition. The demons are really about transgression and kind of like moving around the social box, you know, the rigid social structure. So this is a queer trans Jewish demon with the Yiddish word fegele, which again is kind of a pun because fegele means little bird, but it's also you know, historically used as a word for a queer person. And it's paired with a poem that I did kind of about kind of a queer trans perspective on Jewish demons from a chapbook that I did earlier this year. I had never written a poetry chapbook until earlier this year. There was a poetry jam, and this year's been a lot. So just kind of trying my hand at everything. So that brings me to the work that I'm doing now, which I'm really excited about. And this is kind of where I connect up with Amy a lot more strongly, is where her work is around interviewing and connecting to Jews who feel kind of marginalized from Judaism by being rural or having left Judaism and come back. For me, my community and the way that I have kind of personally come back to Judaism is really around being a queer and trans Jew who connects more strongly to Jewish magic, myth, and mysticism than to mainstream modern Judaism. And I put out a survey maybe 8-9 months ago. So I've been in communities online and in person talking about this connection, but I put out a survey asking people to talk about their experiences with this connection. And I'm calling it People of the Twilight, for that kind of, you know, liminal space that is both magic and marginalized. Twilight is, you know, in the Midrash, Twilight is when all the magic things were created on the 6th day. Like that was when the Shamir worm was created, and the Miriam's well was created, and the mouth of the donkey that spoke. But Twilight is also when demons were created, and Twilight has been used kind of as a code word for queer people throughout at least the 19th and 20th century. So I'm really interested in that connection. So I put out this survey and about 118 people responded. So I'll talk a little bit more about the responses that I got, but I was trying to figure out how I want to present a lot of this information. And I'm really interested in making a document of some kind that talks about, you know, this connection and how people see it and how people experience it. So as Amy's working with her interviews, I've been doing interviews, and I have, you know, I've been picking people from the surveys who were okay with it, and doing Zoom interviews with them, and then creating portraits based on the Zoom interviews. So, oh yeah, I have a couple of just real quick quotes. I don't want to read all the way through them, but when I'm talking about magic, I'm really thinking about this quote from Yuval Harari in his like ancient Jewish magic dissertation. The idea that magic, when we say that there's nothing that exists that's magic as a category separate from spirituality or religion. When you say that something's magic, all you're really saying is that this person is outside the norm. Like the difference between someone practicing magic and someone practicing their religion is that it's a social positioning. And I love this quote that magic, you know, the only information we have from the sentence so-and-so is a witch. It's just that the person we're talking about is seen as powerful, marginal, and dangerous, which I feel like there are strong queer connections there. And then I'm really inspired by Pinar and Sinopoulos Lloyd, who have an ongoing project about queer mysticism at queernature.org. And mysticism, as distinct from mainstream religion, they kind of define as something embodied, something that we can do with our spirituality, and that it's specifically dangerous to status quos. It often appears in times of kind of radical instability, and it makes strange or alienates kind of human systems of meaning. So it's something that emerges from the marginal, but is very, very powerful. And then this quote from Judith Plaskow's introduction to my friend Noam Sienna's incredible book, A Rainbow Thread, which is an anthology of queer Jewish texts, which I cannot recommend highly enough. But in her introduction to that text, she says, "It took some years before I realized that it's unnecessary to condemn practices that no one ever considered within the realm of possibility." And she's talking about the history of queer and transness in Judaism, that you know, we look for ourselves in this history, and what we find are prohibitions, but that you don't prohibit something that wasn't happening. And that there are reasons why prohibitions are created, and contexts in which they happen. And I think that this quote is equally applicable to Jewish magic as it is to queerness. And I think there's a lot of interesting intersection there. So this is my first portrait of Tamar, who is one of the two over the age of 65 responses from my survey. So I was really excited to talk to somebody who had just serious life experience of living in this intersection and these identities. So she identifies as a bisexual femme, Jewish or Hebrew priestess. She is a Kohenet, which was really cool to think about, as I saw one of the earlier presentations by Becca Starr, who is a Kohenet. So Tamar and I talked a lot about, you know, what the intersection is between feeling marginalized in your identity and being on the fringes of Jewish practice and the kind of things that are important to her. She has, you know, amazing practices around sort of healing and working with stones. She has a tarot practice that is viewed through the lens of the Netivot, which is kind of the pathways in the Kohenet movement. And I loved this quote from her. To me, there's just always been this strong sense of alienation, of being on the outside. Twilight people were just dealing in this liminal netherworld space, and it's just natural. That's where magic happens too. I think it's the same space, and to try to navigate both worlds, magic sort of helps you bridge the space between worlds. So it was really powerful talking to her, and we've been able to keep in touch a little bit after our interview. But yeah, I've done 2 other interviews since Tamar. She was my first one, and I'm really excited to work with the other folks that I've talked to, who are bringing just totally different. One of the people that I talked to is a rabbi who lives in California, and another person, you know, lives in another part of California. I'm finding that there's a strong California connection in some of my survey, but you know, everybody just has their own different perspectives on what, you know, resonates with them from this kind of huge selection of Jewish folklore and mysticism. So I'll talk a little bit quickly about the makeup of the survey. So it was definitely very skewed towards the United States, but I did get responses from a lot of other countries, which kind of surprised me. You know, especially since my reach as a surveyor, I figured that I would get probably mostly people who had some kind of connection to me demographically, or, you know, people who are in my age range, people who are in my country. And it did skew heavily towards young adults and in the US, but not entirely. And in my interviews, I'm interested in prioritizing the more marginal voices. Talking to people who are younger, older, coming from different ethnic backgrounds. I asked people to identify themselves just in their own words, kind of how they view their gender and sexuality or orientation. So this is a word cloud. The bigger the word, the more people used it. So there's some, you know, connections through what people, you know, feel drawn to, but there's also some really good, very Jewish specific words in here. I love the person who said they were gender trafe. Somebody said frum lady presenting. And there are a couple of Jewish specific genders in here that have to do with the 6 halachic genders that are discussed, that kind of map onto both intersex and trans experiences. So Ilonet and Tumtum are 2 culturally specific genders from Judaism that are outside the gender binary. And that's been information that's been coming out in the past couple of years that people are really excited about and really, you know, identifying with. I asked people to describe their ethnicity and ethnic backgrounds. So there's, you know, again, a predominance of white and Ashkenazi folks, but I was really excited to hear from people who identified as Jews of color, people who identified as mixed race, from a lot of different sort of backgrounds. And I asked about what, you know, whether folks are affiliated with a particular denomination or movement within Judaism. And you can see unaffiliated is very big there, but there's also a lot more affiliations than I, as a young Jewish person, would ever have known about. I kind of grew up with like Reformed, Conservative, and Orthodox, and that's what you have. I didn't know there was any other possibility. So it was really exciting to me to see things like Renewadox or Kohenet or, you know, egalitarian, secular, humanist, neo-Hasidic. So there's a lot of interesting stuff there. And there were several people who answered the survey who did identify as Orthodox, and how they make sense of the connections there was really cool to read about. So I'm just going to close out with a couple of quotes from things that people said in the survey that really spoke to me. We need a flexible and imaginative Judaism. It's the only way we can exist. It's the mix of subversion and tradition that is so appealing. It allows us a different way to connect to our beliefs. The rhythm of traditional practice is very family-based. We made our own families. Magic is a way of forging our own connections. Magic is a form of worship that can be tailored to individual needs and does not have to rest upon old gendered and homophobic rules if you don't want it to. It's also much more free, private, and open to interpretation. And then this last one really, really spoke to me. One cannot be Jewish without some form of mystical practice, as it is embedded even in mainstream ritual and religious understanding. Mystical study always brings with it a twilight blurring of boundaries. So in this way, any relationship with the divine must contain some form of queerness. So that is my slideshow. I'll bring back Zoom. Stop share. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Ezra. Okay. So same deal as before. If you have questions, please use the raise hand.
Hi, I missed most of Amy's presentation, sadly, so I can't do the comparison. But I had a question for you, Ezra, about your piece on the songs, the 6 songs. So the front cover, it says 6 songs, but it also says the Hebrew word azal. Was that deliberate? Because azal means ended or no more.
Yeah, it was not deliberate until I read it and realized that that was what it said, and then I was like, that's wild. I was definitely going for that, and I think it's funny because I think I might do that cover differently now. That, you know, that was 2017, and I was like, I'm going to use the Hebrew letters that are actually English, kind of that kitschy, like, you know, because I was just being playful with it. But I definitely, I remember looking that up a couple years ago and thinking, that's wild. So
yeah, it's an interesting thing. It's an interesting thing to have included there. I'm not sure how it fit. That's why I wanted to ask about it. Did you come to a conclusion about how it fit for you?
I mean, when I think about that work now, because I showed it, I was illustrating it very directly and I wasn't trying to comment on it.
I see.
But when I spoke to people about it, they led me to some research into like other analysis of Hechelot literature. And there's this incredible paper that connects that form of mysticism, specifically sort of the 6 songs and things like that, as the Jewish version of shamanic initiatory death, which is this idea that to become holy, you need to kill a part of yourself. You need to experience this total disintegration and reintegration. And, you know, they likened it to, you know, experiences that people in other cultures have said where they're eaten by an animal and then they're reborn as a shaman. And to have that kind of, the idea that it's not so much a prohibition, like don't listen to the angels because you will be disintegrated. You know, it says literally like you'll become a fountain of blood. All your bones will get crushed. Like, you know, it's a really intense thing. But the idea is maybe that actually you have to go through that. Like you have to move through all of those stages, not necessarily physically, in order to reach an understanding spiritually. So for me, if the 6 songs actually, if the title says ended, it's a little bit about that death. Like, you know, we're moving.
Interesting. Yeah, because Azal, it means like total loss, none left. There's none left.
Yeah.
That's an interest. Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, that was a great question, Rena.
Thanks.
Unfortunately, I actually have to run, but that does not mean that the conversation needs to end. We have a bunch of hands. So I'm going to make a quick announcement about next week's session. So let me read that real quickly. Okay, so next week's session is going to be Bilha Zussman, who is from Amsterdam, who will present Hineni and Ineni, Sieving and Being Sieved, images from her Bible notebook exploring why aren't Bilha and Silpa counted as matriarchs, and Yehudis Barmatz from Israel, who will present her exhibition Bright Moon, Dark Coffee at Beta in Jerusalem, along with fellow artist Eleanor Schwartz and curator Avital Noor Wexler. So definitely join us next week. And so because I do have to leave, I'm just gonna say, if possible, to make sure to stay muted as the discussion goes, just to make sure that, you know, it doesn't get too unorganized. And thank you everybody for being here, and please, please, please continue the discussion. I'm so sorry I have to run. And yeah, so thank you all. All right, maybe Richard, do you want to take it off with your question?
Sure, let me just jump in because I can't contain myself. Anyway, thank you both presenters. It was really simply fascinating, to say the least, in any number of ways. Just going back to, let's see here. Amy. Oh, Amy. Okay. I guess I wanted to mention that. What did I want to mention? Oh, okay. What I wanted to mention was that, I mean, first of all, your journey is astounding. It's a very similar to, I think, many journeys, but everyone's is different and quite singular. You might, unless you're already familiar with it, there's a book called Wrestling with God. It's by Steve Greenberg. It's probably at least a decade, if not 20 years old now. He was the first openly Orthodox rabbi, and he talks about his story of dealing with all of that. It's really an inspiring book, but one of the main things, of course, is just the whole notion of that's our job, to wrestle with God, and as you are doing, and as many of us are doing. So it's something I think you might get something out of, to say the least. But your work is fascinating, and lots of great stuff there. Ezra, your work is kind of blowing me away. Just one thing, you had just said, I'm going to go back to the end of your conversation, you talked about that there's this notion of that in order to get to a certain spiritual place, one essentially needs to have a piece of oneself die. Oh, you know, there's also an idea that in utilizing the current utilization, or even the old utilization of psychedelics, part of the psychedelic experience is actually experiencing a kind of death in which you just totally allow yourself to go. And as a matter of fact, specifically, I don't know if you're familiar with this, but that is also a piece of like the ayahuasca experience, which is, I don't know if the kind of mysticism that you're interested in includes using foreign substances or nature substances, but it's certainly a place where that kind of thing can happen. But almost in a way more important, you really opened up a whole piece for me. I've been fascinated by angels. In a way, I've always been drawn to Shadim, mainly because, you know, we're told, you know, obviously the rabbis, meaning the Gemara, really believes in Shadim, but I love to walk in the dark. I love to walk when it's, you know, just outside. But oh, wait a minute, the Shadim are there. But in a way, those Shadim, they're friendly, meaning there's this creativity about them, these forces out there, but suddenly to characterize them as one thing, as quote, and that they are transgressive, but transgression means is liberating, as opposed to angels as being fearsome and perhaps more negatively dangerous. Thank you very much for putting that out there on the table as thinking about just in terms of going through one's life, but also making art about them. Anyway, thank you, thank you, thank you. Wonderful.
Richard, I'd love to jump in right there because what you said is you know, I think that what both of the artists, the way that it hit me, both of you are dealing with the abyss, right? The Ein Sof. It's that gray area. And you're both doing it in such masterful ways. And I want to say thank you, first of all, for being just incredibly open about your processes and really about, I mean, like, I feel you both put your brains on the table today and let us, you know, you dissected them for us so nicely. So thank you for that. Because it's rare that we get that kind of analysis of process. And I really appreciated that. I felt, Amy, that your work, it's so interesting to me that that you choose, you know, this material and cloth, and these are things where, you know, they grow of the earth but then they're transformed by you in such masterful ways, but they're so personal. Like, it's a completely personal process. Whereas Ezra, I see like your, you know, the graphics as being so much more, when we talk about the first mention of Yiddish, right? And I'm thinking of the plaster boards that were so important for conveying information in the shtetls, not just of Eastern Europe, but of Muncie, from which I hail. So I can tell you that, you know, I just think that it's fascinating. I thank you both and look forward to seeing more of your work.
Thank you so much.
I also, Ezra, I want to ask you just a personal question. You don't have to answer, but where in Western Mass are you? Because I'm speaking from Sheffield, Massachusetts.
Oh, okay. I'm in Ashfield. I'm like a little bit north of Northampton. Yeah.
Oh, okay, I see. And a little more towards the center. Okay.
So there, you know that there is a Yiddish book repository there.
I do. I went with. I was so blessed to go with Noam Sienna, who wrote A Rainbow Thread. We visited together in 2018 in the fall and got to look through their whole collection.
Very nice.
Incredible. There's amazing resources out here. I moved here from the Boston area about 2 years ago, and I was very, like, you know, I had just started to have a really cool Jewish community in the Boston area, and I wasn't sure what I was in for moving to a more rural area. It is rich here. It is very rich in amazing alternative Judaism. So I feel very lucky.
Could I jump in here too? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, hi, Ezra. I'm Joel. I wanted to let you know also that I'm kind of like the comics book guy in the salon, and we did 3 Jewish comic shows before this that we curated. I wanted to compliment both of you today, but Ezra, I was really like struck with your work. And I wanted to tell you also, not only was it beautifully crafted and beautifully drawn in a traditional way, but, you know, the essence of the salon is taking Jewish tradition, however you see it, you know, taking traditional Jewish tradition and bending it and making it new. And you're doing that exactly. And so I just want to thank you for that kind of like bringing that out there, because the notion of using Jewish magic to address issues in your own identity, but also all our identities, all our psyches, all our, you know, you did it in such a finely lasered way, and the work is absolutely beautiful. So please keep in contact with us.
Thank you so much.
May I jump in? Ezra, first of all, your work is just, it's phenomenal. I started as a comic book artist, so I have a great appreciation for your work. Your zines are really breathtaking. I need to study you so much deeper now.
Thank you.
My question is, have you thought of, or have you already done this, studied initiatic, let's say, organizations in the West that have blended, let's say, Judaic studies with these more esoteric aspects of initiations? I come right away to my mind, I think of the Freemasons. I come from a family that has been in Freemasonry for a very long time, Jewish. Many Sephardim of Western Sephardic background have joined the Freemasons for a long, long time, since the 1700s. And we're very used to this idea of, dealing with the fact that you have to face death in order to become something else, a better self towards enlightenment. Have you been exposed to this kind of information?
Yes. So I'm very interested in the history of esotericism and occultism and magic. I have studied quite a bit, and I'm not so knowledgeable about Freemasonry, but in terms of, the blending of Jewish tradition with a lot of Western and particularly Christian tradition, I have a little trouble with it, because a lot of it comes from, for example, like the Lesser Key of Solomon, and the whole all of this stuff that is founded in this idea of Jews as, sorcerers who were dangerous to, Christian community, but who also could be manipulated to do important things for people who needed it. A lot of it is just so deeply rooted in anti-Semitism. And when people talk about, kind of this modern syncretic blending that comes from kind of the Order of the Golden Dawn and all of these Western esotericists. And for me, it's just, I can't really respect that the tradition has such a history of being founded on, it requires anti-Semitism to function. It requires the idea of Jewish magic as other, and as kind of this Orientalist flavor added to, folks who were not interested in the authentic tradition. And most of it is very mangled. It's very misinterpreted. It's very separate from the actual Jewish tradition. So it's a little bit of a personal goal for me, is to publicize, because I meet a lot of people who understand Jewish mysticism as something that non-Jews do. And as something that is, something that is a part of non-Jewish traditions. And it's very personally important to me that folks have an understanding that these are authentic, original, cultural creations that have a context that's really important. Sure. So I'm interested in all that kind of conversation.
Wow. What a great take. I'm glad I asked you this question, because your perspective is really enriching. Seeing this as a, for lack of better word, as indigenous to us, so that others must respect this mysticism.
It's that it comes from something that's inseparable from the Jewish people, and it's inseparable from Jewish religion, and that it should be understood in that context. And that I think there may be opportunities for interconnection with other traditions, but it has to be on an entirely consensual and equal basis. To happen. And historically, that's not how it happened.
Excellent.
Thanks for that question.
I'd love to jump in for 1 second, just because Judith Joseph, who's also on this feed, and I were discussing in terms of your work and this notion of the end, right? This death, that there's the whole, petit mort, there's the sexual connotation, and that whole jump then into eroticism, and what is eroticism as vis-a-vis, Judaism. And so you're actually confronting that paradigm, like that's what your work really is. And there it is, right? That the accidental mention on that piece of death is so appropriate, really appropriate for a work that deals with sexuality.
Interesting. Thanks.
Ezra, I'd just like to ask you another question, and that is, where did you get educated? I mean, you don't toss around the term hey, hello, literature like it's nothing. I mean, it's like, I'm very, very impressed. It's not for me to be impressed by you, of course. You are your own person. But I'm wondering, I mean, did you go to yeshiva? I mean, or you're just a mad research hound?
Yeah, the latter. No,
Oh, God bless you. It's amazing. Wow.
I dropped out of Hebrew school after I did my B'nai Mitzvah. I completely left Judaism culturally, religiously, and I started to come back 100% on my own terms in a community of people who were interested in this study. So it's really just there's a lot of individual people I have to thank for my education, but none of them are affiliated with any institutions or anything like that.
Your knowledge base is really, really impressive. Boy, and just keep it up. Wow, it's because also it informs your art, not only explaining your art, but also making your art. It's just thrilling to see, really. Wow.
Thank you. Pearl, were you, I thought I saw you raising your
hand. Yeah, I don't have any hands. So first of all, thank you. Very interesting, of course. But I'd like to add some information and remind people about the Kabbalah, mysticism, that in Kabbalah, there's no reason to go through a death in order to go through transformation, that usually it happens at the age of 40. A lot of times all these powers are passed down through mother to her children. And I'm talking as an artist, as a psychic, as a channel. I lived in Israel for 45 years, 20 in Israel, and the world of Kabbalah opened to me at the age of 40 like it's supposed to. And I began channeling and getting messages and doing healing and getting messages. You know, it's not always easy. And I believe that many of us, when they do their art, are channeling your guides, God, or whatever, because I know that I am. I was sitting opposite my computer many months, a year and a half ago, and all of a sudden I heard the statement, immigration, and I said, aha. So I made a contract, or I agreed with God, the universe, that I would do a whole series on immigration. So as I said, I don't think my daughter now is, but she's also an artist. She's started channeling. And my granddaughter, who's 6 years old, is really connected, okay? So there wasn't any death, but, you know, when I opened to it, the whole universe got together to have this happen. And someone before was talking about there is no coincidence. So there is a Hebrew word. The Hebrew word is b'mikre. And in Israel, they say you have gematria, which is numerology. And when you rearrange the Hebrew letters for b'mikre, it comes out rak mi Hashem, which means only from God. So the reason that I wanted to add this information is I've never taken drugs, and I am now in California, okay? I don't drink. So I think a lot of us can have a spiritual experience without having to take mind-altering drugs, which I would never do, okay? And, you know, believe that many of us are channels for God. I believe that Jewish history is in our blood. It's in our DNA, so you connect to music. And thank you for listening to me.
Thank you so much. And I think one of the things that I really appreciated about the responses to the survey that I asked about from people who study all forms of Jewish mysticism is that there's a really strong pluralism, that it, you know, what works for one person will not work for another person, and that there are many paths. And the piece about the shamanic initiatory death, that's the Hechelot mysticism is pre-Kabbalistic. It's before all of the sort of Kabbalistic understanding. So it's kind of a separate tradition. I mean, it comes into play with it, but I always appreciate hearing what, you know, personally resonates. I also don't, you know, I'm not interested in mind altering substances so much, but I know people who are, and I respect their path. So it's cool to hear yours. Thank you. I know that Hannah Zelig has a hand up.
I wasn't sure if you had abandoned the hand raising thing. So
it's hard for me to see them. Yeah.
Oh, okay. No. I didn't know if I should just jump in. But there were a couple. First of all, both of you, thank you so much for sharing your inner lives. I'm just like, I'm shaking. It was so exciting. So thank you. That was really generous of both of you to do this. Ezra, I loved how you're. I love how Amy was wrestling with God and you're embracing the demons. And it was just this really wonderful thing about like what you're getting your arms around. And Ezra, I think a lot about this idea of angels and demons because, you know, in the binary world of Judaism where you're Jewish or you're not, you're kosher or you're not, you're pure or you're treif, you know, like all that. That angels are very much associated with that. You know, the Malachei HaShalom come in on Shabbat and they come and welcome, you know, they announce to Abraham that this is going to be a nation and all that. And then demons were kind of invented because people were terrified of what they couldn't understand, especially feminine power. And, you know, going back to the book of Samuel with the witch, when Saul brings up the witch. And so I love how it almost takes a non-binary person to go and get in there and kind of mix things up. So that's more of an observation than a question. So your generosity is just boundless. And Amy, I was wondering about whether the whole, I don't know if this is just your presentation or if it's your personal art. I mean, I come from an Orthodox background, a Beis Yaakov background, and I left it and became much more profoundly interested in Judaism, ironically. But you start off with this fictional character, almost like you're displacing your own story, like you know, people are going through the other person's stuff, and then you go and you talk about the ancestors you barely know, and then you talk about your your immediate family, and then you move inward to your own emotions, and then you have your own emotions dealing with somebody else collaborating with you, and then you start moving to strangers talking about their own Judaism. So there's this just beautiful journal of the work that you showed today. I'm wondering if you're planning on, I don't even know if you meant to do that, but are you planning on moving out and talking to non-Jews and understand their relationship with Judaism, or is that just, am I just projecting my own story onto yours?
That's an interesting question. I mean, I guess it's kind of what I am doing with my collaborator Sidika. So, which is so personal in so many ways because we've had such a close relationship for probably about 25 years, but because the times, and I think Sidika's actually on this call, but the times that we were the closest in terms of the amount of time we were able to spend with one another, neither of us were really kind of going there personally. So it's to me, it's an exploration. I'm excited about it because we've talked a lot about the way Islam and Christianity and Judaism are so intertwined, and both in terms of shared spiritual stories and lineage, but also with the art and the techniques, and you know, whether we're talking about paper cutting or tiles, or you know, like they're so they just keep feeding in on each other. It's like they're braided, and so I don't know where that will lead. I think for me personally, I guess what part of the way I'm where I am now is because I've really felt like, you know, it's important to kind of talk from where I'm situated rather than somewhere else. And so, yeah, I guess specifically with a project with Sidika, I don't know where it's going to end up. And so, but it won't only be in Jewish spaces, that's definite. And so it'll be interesting to see kind of where it blossoms into next, if that answers your question.
Thank you so much. I just also, it was so interesting that Yonatas asked that question about Yiddish, and it like came up later in Ezra's work. So it all just, everything sort of like, it was beautiful full circle. So thank you again, both of you.
Thank you. I don't know how people are feeling for time. I don't know if people are at the point where they feel like they're out of politeness sort of hanging on. I realized here it's 3:37, so if people have to leave, that's fine. Ezra, I don't know what your time is like. I'm okay to stay around if people have questions.
Yeah.
So
yeah, totally up to, is there anybody that we haven't heard from who still has a hand raised? I don't think so.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I see little hands. I think that Allie made me a host, so I see little blue hands, but I don't know if those are old ones or new ones. So I guess if anyone else has any questions, just jump in, and otherwise. Is that Rena who just went up? And then Regina?
It is Rena again.
Regina.
It was Rena again. Just a quick one, Regina, just before you speak. I would like to see, I wrote it in the chat too. It would be really great if I could, how do I see your presentation, Amy? Because I missed it.
Oh,
so
yeah.
It was recorded. Is it going to be available, or can you send me or something? Because I need to see it.
I think that,
I'm sorry,
I think that's part of, no, thank you. It's part of, I don't know what Yona's master plan is. I know she's been recording them all with the plan of putting them somewhere where they're going to be publicly available, but I don't know if there's a way to have access to it sooner, but there might be, and I think that Yona's the person to ask.
Yes.
Yeah. So you can't share your link with me of at least the
I can certainly share my slides. I'm happy to share my slides.
That would be great.
Yeah,
okay.
My website is sort of a work in progress that I'm hoping to have ready in a week or two, but right now you won't really find me online. So
thanks.
Thanks.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure these presentations are all going up together after the series is done. At least that's what I've been able to understand from Yona's emails. Regina.
Hi, I'm from New York City and quarantining in a suburb outside of Albany, New York. And I just am thrilled to have this time to be with artists. Your work is fascinating to me, so lovely. I'm a volunteer curator in a synagogue gallery, and both of you would be welcome to have an exhibit, except we're quarantining. So I hope on the email that you sent out, you'll put your information so we can link to it, and I'll put you in potential artists. Judith Joseph had an exhibit at the Goldwing, and I bought one of her pieces, and it's Jewish artists, all artists, but these Jewish artists are they touch me, they inspire me. Thank you so much.
Thank you. We can put our contact information in the chat as well. So
yeah.
Let's see. Robin? Oh, you're muted.
No, I got it. Thank you. It's been unbelievable. And I can't ask any questions because just too much stuff. But I want to thank you both so much. There are pieces of your presentations which really spoke so deeply to my heart and my practice right now. And I'm going to look you guys both up and connect with you. And thank you, thank you, thank you. And that will, Yona said that the other day, that these will all be released after the series ends. These recorded announcements. So thank you. And I'm going to sign off unless we're all signing off, and then we'll all sign off together. Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay, bye-bye.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I think we've gotten to everybody. There's nobody else that has a question. All right, thank you all so much for being here. This was such an honor to do. Amy, thank you so much for going through this with me. I would not be a part of this organization if I hadn't met you. So thank you.
Thank you, Ezra, and thanks to everyone.
All right, take care, everybody.
Thank you.